Hey guys, Coach Pop here. Thanks for joining me for the video cast for today. So this week we begin our examination of the Mongols for the week, who you'll remember from John Green are always the exception to every rule. And when we talk about the Mongols, the guy that we are usually referring to immediately is Genghis Khan. Now, sometimes you'll see his name spelled this way, Chinggis Khan. But in point of fact, his born name was Temüjin, and Temujin was a precarious young man, and we're not going to go into details about his biography. But in 1206, he is elected the Great Khan. This would be sort of the leader of the pastoral nomads in Central Asia, in his case, the area that is now Mongolia. Once he becomes the Great Khan of these people, he immediately starts changing the way things are done. For one of the things he does early on is removing tribal affiliations. In other words, family lines are not what is important in terms of trying to figure out how his army is going to be run. Instead, leaders are chosen by talent, and so he's kind of breaking the traditional association with kinship for certain positions, and instead turning it into a meritocracy, which obviously has the effect of increasing the capabilities of his military machine, but it also weakens the power of some of the larger clans that might have had a monopoly on certain power that would be a threat to his rule. He then goes about reorganizing their soldiers, the way their military operated. Again, they are pastoral nomads riding on horseback and not necessarily, the settled city dwellers. So their understanding of a military is a little bit different. But among the things he changes, first of all, he comes up with this idea of tumens, these organization principle based on base 10. So like a tumen is 10 men, and then you have 10 groups of 10 men to form one larger unit, and then 10 of the 100 men units. And you basically stay with your other 9 guys so long as all of you stay alive. And so in many cases, you'd have these warriors who would have been fighting alongside each other for decades, literally. Second, the cavalry, which is a word that we've experienced before, that is to say, soldiers on horseback. First of all, 100% of the Mongols were on horseback. But he comes up with this idea of creating a lighter version and a heavier version depending on who they were going to come into contact. So the amount of armor and armaments that they would use would change depending on who the opponent would be. He also comes up with a system using scouts and messengers to both survey the huge amounts of territory that he will conquer, but then also sending those messages back. The basic strategy that he employs is sometimes referred to as tactical terrorism. And the tactical part kind of makes sense. The terrorism part, though, one of the things that he does exceedingly well is he is so complete and some will say brutal in his conquests that he succeeds in building a reputation that literally scares potential opponents into surrendering before he and his army even show up in certain places. It's literally scaring them so that they don't have to end up fighting, and it's quite effective in his particular case. Now, once he's got his military machine sort of lined up, then he starts expanding territory. He's conquering people that include the settled civilizations that are surrounding the areas that we associate with pastoral nomads in Central Asia. First, he begins to expand west. This is into the territory held by the Abbasids, into other parts of Central Asia. He also, though, is expanding east. And In 1220, he takes the Jin dynasty. The Jin dynasty, you might remember, was a group that was sort of technically beyond the Great Wall of China, but they were peeling away territory from the Song dynasty, so much so the Song dynasty had to move their capital south to get away from the Jurchens or the Jin. But Temujin just flat out conquers them straight out. He does not, however, actually conquer the Song. That won't come until one of his descendants. To the south, then, he moves towards the Abbasid Caliphate, which I mentioned, and the Delhi Sultanate. Now, he will attack the Delhi Sultanate, but he doesn't actually conquer it. Same thing with the Abbasids. He's taking territory in the northern part of what's like Iraq and Iran, but he's not actually moving on Baghdad itself. By 1221, though, however, he has succeeded in conquering both of those in a way. This is something we'll look at closely throughout the rest of the week in documents. Um, like, to what extent is it actually taken over during his lifetime? It will, without a doubt. But certainly in the case of the Delhi Sultanate, he does not ever take the capital city of Delhi. So I mean, from the perspective of the empire there, their capital is still under their control. They still consider themselves to be the empire that they always were. Once he's conquered all this territory, he's got the largest contiguous land empire that's ever been assembled. But how is he going to administer this? Well, first of all, the system that emerges is something called a khanate. A khanate is a military rule. In some regards, you could say it's very similar to a shogunate, except for it doesn't have that sort of feudal structure to it, and it is a pastoral nomad who is the military dictator. And that turns out to be a pretty significant fact, that it's a pastoral nomad who is at the top of this, because in many ways, what Genghis Khan and his successors will employ is a strategy that I like to call borrowed civilization. Okay, so they're going to adapt and adopt all of these things from their conquered people. For example, they will set up a capital city in what's now Mongolia. To this day, it is the capital of Mongolia, that originally started off as a tent city. Again, another sort of parallel to what happened in Japan there. But over time, that will actually become a full-fledged city. Siege warfare is a technique that he picks up over time, having to conquer city after city after city with their city walls and their defense system. He takes conquered people from other territories and hires them basically to teach him how to take these cities. So that includes things like cannons, cannonballs just bashing the crap out of the walls around the city, catapults, battering rams to knock down doors, all of those things that we sort of associate with like the way that you take a medieval city. He didn't know any of these things as a pastoral nomad, but he gets people who do know to teach him and his army how to do it themselves. They borrow a writing system from another pastoral group, the Uyghurs. That is, it's not Chinese, and it's definitely not like other alphabets that we've seen. But again, these were people who had an oral tradition and not a writing system, but he recognizes that he needs them. Similarly, he passes a law code, a legal code written in this new script for all of his empire. And again, it's an idea. He sees that other civilizations have this. This is something that he's got to have as well. A key fundamental, though, in that legal code is the idea of religious tolerance. The Mongols themselves are animists and shamanists, and they have no desire to impose their beliefs on anybody else, but they also set it up so that no one else can do the same either. And so it's a pretty remarkable thing. And in the in the context of the military and aggressive violence of the Mongols, the religious tolerance aspect is also a part of it as well. Using bureaucrats. One of the things they like to do is take Persian bureaucrats and move them to East Asia, and East Asian bureaucrats and move them to what we call the Middle East. Again, they don't know how to run a government. They don't have those sorts of bureaucracies. So they hire the people that do know how to do that and then put them in positions where they're least likely to actually accrue any power to become a threat to them. And then finally, promoting trade. They are, again, pastoral nomads. They don't actually produce manufactured goods. They make all of their money, though, by taxing the trade in the goods that are produced by the settled, civilized people that they are about to conquer. So promoting trade is a huge advantage because it's their only way of really adding to their wealth. And a consequence of this is an idea called the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Obviously, it's patterned after Pax Romana. But the idea is the territory controlled by the Mongols is so vast and they're so interested in promoting trade, but everybody is afraid of betraying the Mongols. And so any kind of trade within their territory is pretty much guaranteed to be peaceful because no one wants to do anything to upset the Mongols. There's a saying at the time that a girl could walk all along the Silk Road with a giant piece of gold on her head and nobody would threaten her because they were all afraid of being punished by the Mongols. Now, in 1227, then, Genghis Khan dies. He's assembled this huge land empire. Again, even though a great deal of it is essentially just pastoral lands, it's a gigantic amount of territory. But then the question, as always happens, who's going to take over? And it's a pretty complicated, intense selection process for a while until eventually one of Temujin's sons, not his oldest son, Ogadai, is elected to become the Great Khan. Now, Ogadai had his talents, but conquering to the degree that Genghis Khan did was not among them. On the other hand, many of the grandsons, several in particular that you see here, we're going to look at throughout the rest of the week, are incredibly good at expanding the territory through conquest. On the other hand, what Ogadai's strength is more of an administrator. In other words, he's going to let the grandsons expand the empire and handle the military campaigns. He's more going to try to focus on building the infrastructure for what he sees as the great empire of his father. For example, he brings architects into the tent city at the time, Karakoram, to begin actually constructing buildings to turn it into a full-fledged city. He also starts expanding the bureaucracy, again, relying heavily on Persian and Chinese officials to sort of help shape the way this new type of system is going to go. Ogadai then dies in 1241. And then it gets really thorny about who is supposed to take over. And there's several different iterations of the Great Khan, and nobody's really satisfied with anything until eventually it's decided that the empire is going to be split into 4 separate khanates. This is a situation that you might kind of remember really like Alexander the Great. After he conquers this giant territory, it then gets divided among his generals. In this case, though, the empire is divided up among 3 of his grandsons, the 3 that are named above, and 1 of his other sons. The other son is Chagatai or Jogadai. He will be given a khanate in Central Asia that is sort of surrounded on all sides by the other ones, but it's also right in the heartland of the Silk Road. It's a great spot for trade. So this is a map we're going to see an awful lot for the rest of the week, okay? This is all part of Pax Mongolica. It's all Mongol territory, but over here in the west, is the Khanate of the Golden Horde, which originally is led by the grandson Batu. They are the ones that, as we'll see, are controlling the Russian principalities. They don't occupy it, they don't move in there and take over the territory, but they are definitely in control. Down here is the Ilkhanate of Persia. This is originally the grandson Helagu's territory that includes what was the Abbasid dynasty or caliphate, and then the area into Mesopotamia and up to the Indus River Valley. Here is the Chagatai Khanate, the Khanate of the sun, Chagatai or Jogadai, you'll see it spelled, that includes these really wealthy cities along the Silk Roads. And then over here in the east is an interesting situation. You've got the Khanate of the Great Khan, and one of Genghis Khan's grandsons, Kublai, is named the Great Khan. So he's he's got that title there. He also, though, conquers the Song dynasty. And as we'll see, he does something really unusual. He claims the mandate of heaven and establishes his own dynasty in China. But it is also part of the Khanate of the Great Khan. So we'll look in the next lesson in turn at each of these four and how they're similar and different, and how all of them work together to create this giant safety system for transregional trade that's going to really blow up in a way that it never had before, even greater than the time of the Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire. So this is sort of our introduction then to the Mongols. We'll take different aspects of it again throughout the rest of the week, hopefully in really short bite-sized pieces. I want to thank you for your attention and look forward to seeing you in class.